The gunshot shattered the stillness of the Wyoming morning, and Willa Crawford dropped the water bucket she had been carrying, her heart hammering against her ribs as she recognized the unmistakable sound of danger approaching her isolated homestead. She stood frozen for just a moment, her eyes scanning the ridgeline beyond her small cabin where the pine trees stood sentinel against the brilliant blue sky. It was September of 1876, and she had been alone on this piece of land for nearly 3 months now, ever since her father had died from the fever that swept through the area. At 22 years old, she had managed to keep the homestead running through sheer determination and endless backbreaking work, but she had always known in the back of her mind that trouble might find her eventually. Another shot rang out, closer this time, and Willa finally moved, her survival instincts kicking in. She ran toward the cabin, her worn boots kicking up dust, her long auburn hair streaming behind her as she moved. The homestead sat in a valley carved between 2 mountain ranges, miles from the nearest settlement, and she had no neighbors to call on for help. Her father had chosen this location specifically for its isolation, wanting to live away from the growing towns and the noise of civilization, but now that isolation felt like a death sentence. She burst through the cabin door and immediately went for the rifle that hung above the fireplace. Her hands were steady, despite the fear coursing through her veins as she checked to make sure it was loaded. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was barely tall enough to hold a gun properly, and she had become a decent shot over the years, though she had never had to aim at another person before. Through the window, she could see them now, 5 riders coming down from the northern ridge, moving at a steady pace toward her property. Even from a distance, she could tell they were not friendly visitors. They rode with the confident swagger of men who took what they wanted, and the sunlight glinted off the weapons they carried. Willa positioned herself at the window, keeping low, trying to think through her options. She could try to hold them off, but 5 against 1 were terrible odds. She could run, but where would she go? The mountains surrounded her, and without supplies or a horse, she would not last long in the wilderness. Her mare was in the small barn behind the cabin, but trying to reach it now would leave her completely exposed. The riders were close enough now that she could make out their faces, hard and weathered, eyes scanning her property with the calculating gaze of predators. The man in the lead had a thick black beard and wore a hat that had seen better days. He raised his hand, and the group came to a stop about 50 yards from her cabin. "You in the house?" he called out, his voice carrying across the distance. "We know you are in there. Come on out and we can talk about this civilized-like." Willa kept her position, the rifle aimed at the window, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. Her mouth was dry, and she could feel sweat beginning to form on her palms despite the cool mountain air. "I have nothing to say to you," she called back, proud that her voice did not shake. "This is private property, and you are not welcome here. Leave now." The bearded man laughed, a harsh sound that made her skin crawl. "Now that is not very friendly. We have been riding for days, and we could use some hospitality. Food, water, maybe a warm place to rest. You would not deny weary travelers, would you?" "I would deny thieves and outlaws," Willa shot back. "I know what you are. Leave now, or I will shoot." One of the other men, a thin, wiry figure with a scar running down his cheek, spurred his horse forward a few steps. "You hear that, boys? The little lady thinks she's going to shoot us." The bearded leader held up his hand again, stopping his companion. "No need for things to get ugly. We just want what you have got, and then we will be on our way. You cooperate, and nobody has to get hurt." Willa's mind raced. She knew what men like this were capable of, knew that their promises meant nothing. If she let them into her cabin, she would be at their mercy, and that was something she could not allow. But what chance did she have against 5 armed men? The answer came from an unexpected direction. A rifle shot cracked through the air, and the hat flew off the head of the scarred man, spinning through the air before landing in the dirt several feet away. The outlaws' horses reared and whinnied in surprise, and the men scrambled to control their mounts while looking around frantically for the source of the shot. "The next one will not miss," a deep voice called out from somewhere in the trees to the east of the cabin. "Get off this land now." Willa's heart leapt with hope, even as confusion flooded through her. She had no idea who had fired that shot, but whoever it was had just evened the odds considerably. The bearded leader had his gun drawn now, scanning the tree line. "Who the hell are you? This is not your concern." I am making it my concern, the voice replied, and Willa thought she detected a slight accent she could not quite place, something that spoke of time spent far from civilization. You have 5 seconds to turn those horses around, or I start putting bullets in something other than hats. There is only one of you, the scarred man snarled, his hand hovering near his weapon. 5 against 1, friend. You might get one of us, but the rest will hunt you down. I have killed more than 5 men in my time, the voice said calmly, and something in the tone made it clear this was not an idle boast. And I'm a much better shot than any of you. Want to test that? The outlaws exchanged glances, and Willa could see the calculation happening in their expressions. They had expected an easy target, a lone woman they could intimidate and rob without resistance. The presence of an unknown sharpshooter had changed the equation entirely. This is not over, the bearded leader finally said, his jaw clenched in anger. We will remember this. So will I, the voice promised. Now ride. For a long moment, nobody moved, and Willa held her breath, afraid that violence was about to explode across her homestead. Then the bearded man jerked his reins, turning his horse back toward the ridge, and the others followed, though not before casting venomous looks back at the cabin and the tree line. Willa watched them go, not daring to move from her position until they had disappeared over the ridge. Even then, she kept the rifle ready, her entire body tense with adrenaline. They are gone, the voice said, much closer now, and Willa spun toward the sound. A man emerged from the trees, and despite everything that had just happened, Willa found herself staring. He was massive, easily over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed almost impossibly broad beneath the buckskin shirt he wore. His hair was dark and long, falling past his shoulders, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. He carried a rifle with the ease of someone who had been born with a weapon in his hands, and as he walked closer, she could see the incredible definition of muscle in his arms and chest. This was a man who had spent his life in the wilderness, who had carved his existence from the harsh landscape through sheer strength and will. His eyes met hers through the window, and she was struck by their color, a deep gray that seemed to see right through her. You can lower the rifle, he said, his voice gentler now than it had been when addressing the outlaws. I mean you no harm. Willa hesitated for only a moment before doing as he suggested, though she kept the weapon within easy reach. She moved to the door and opened it slowly, stepping out onto the small porch that ran along the front of the cabin. Up close, the man was even more imposing. He had to be in his late 20s, maybe 30 at most, with a face that was handsome despite being weathered by sun and wind. There was something in his expression that spoke of loneliness, of years spent in solitude, but also of strength and reliability. Who are you? Willa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Name is Cade Nathanson, he replied, stopping a respectful distance from the porch. I've been tracking those men for the better part of 2 weeks. They robbed a trading post up near Deadwood, killed the owner and his wife. I've been trying to catch up to them ever since. You are a lawman? Willa asked, though something told her that was not quite right. Cade shook his head. Not exactly. I'm just someone who does not like to see bad men get away with doing bad things. I knew they were headed this direction, thought I might be able to stop them before they found another target. His gray eyes studied her face. Looks like I made it just in time. Willa felt her legs begin to shake as the reality of what had almost happened crashed over her. She reached out to steady herself against the porch railing, and suddenly Cade was there, his large hand supporting her elbow with surprising gentleness. Easy now, he said softly. The danger has passed. You are safe. For now, Willa managed to say. But they will come back, will they not? They said this was not over. Cade's expression darkened. They might try. But if they do, they will have to go through me, and I promise you, they do not want that. Willa looked up at him, studying his face, trying to determine if he was telling the truth or just another threat in a different form. But there was something in his eyes, something honest and protective, that made her want to trust him. Why would you do that? She asked. You do not know me. Does not matter, Cade replied simply. It is the right thing to do. Besides, he added with the ghost of a smile, I cannot very well spend 2 weeks tracking these men just to let them terrorize you after I scared them off. That would defeat the whole purpose. Despite everything, Willa felt a small laugh escape her lips. I suppose that is true. She straightened, pulling herself together, and offered him her hand. Willa Crawford. And thank you, Mr. Nathanson. You saved my life. His hand engulfed hers, warm and calloused and strong. Cade is fine, and you are welcome, Miss Crawford. Willa, she corrected, surprised at her own boldness. Their eyes met and held for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, and Willa felt something shift in her chest, a flutter of awareness that had nothing to do with fear or adrenaline. Willa, Cade repeated, and the way he said her name sent warmth spreading through her. She pulled her hand back, suddenly aware of how she must look, dusty and disheveled, her hair coming loose from its braid. I should thank you properly. Would you like to come inside? I do not have much, but I can offer you coffee and food. Cade hesitated, and for a moment she thought he was going to refuse. Then he nodded slowly. That would be appreciated. But first, let me take care of my horse, and I want to scout the perimeter, make sure those men really did leave. I have a small barn out back, Willa offered. Your horse can stay there. My mare could use the company. Much obliged, Cade said. He turned and walked back toward the trees, moving with a fluid grace that seemed at odds with his massive size, and returned a few minutes later, leading a large roan stallion that looked as strong and capable as its owner. Willa showed him to the barn, watching as he tended to his horse with practiced efficiency. He was clearly a man who took care of his animals, speaking to the stallion in low, soothing tones as he removed the saddle and bridle and made sure the horse had access to water. I will be back shortly, he said once the horse was settled. Stay inside and keep that rifle handy, just in case. Willa nodded and returned to the cabin, her mind racing with everything that had just happened. She busied herself building up the fire and putting coffee on to boil, grateful to have something to do with her hands. She also pulled out what food she had available, some bread she had baked 2 days ago, dried venison, and a small amount of cheese she had been saving. True to his word, Cade returned about 20 minutes later, knocking softly on the door before entering when she called out permission. They are gone, he reported, accepting the cup of coffee she offered him with a nod of thanks. But their tracks head north and then circle back east. They are not going far, probably planning to make camp and decide what to do next. Willa felt her stomach drop. So they will come back. Maybe, Cade said carefully. Or maybe they will decide it is not worth the risk and move on to easier targets. Hard to say with men like that. They are unpredictable. But you do not think they will move on, Willa said, reading the truth in his expression. Cade took a sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving her face. No, I do not. That bearded one, his name is Jack Mallory, and he has a reputation for being mean and vindictive. The fact that someone stood up to him and ran him off will eat at him. He will want revenge. Then what do I do? Willa asked, hating the note of helplessness in her voice. I cannot just abandon my home. This is all I have. But I cannot defend it alone either, not against 5 men. Cade set down his coffee cup and leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. You are not alone. I will stay, help you defend this place until those men are dealt with one way or another. Willa stared at him. You would do that? But you do not know me. You have no obligation to me. I made it my obligation when I fired that shot, Cade replied firmly. Besides, I came out here to stop those men from hurting more people. If I leave now and they come back and hurt you, then I failed in what I set out to do. But what about your life? Do you not have somewhere you need to be? Something flickered in Cade's eyes, something that looked like old pain. No. I've been living up in the mountains for the past few years, trapping and hunting. I do not have any commitments, any place I need to be. I am free to stay as long as it takes. Willa felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, overwhelmed by this stranger's kindness. I cannot pay you. I barely have enough to feed myself. I'm not asking for payment, Cade said gently. Just let me help, please. The way he said please with such genuine concern broke through the last of Willa's resistance. She nodded, blinking back the tears. Thank you. I do not know what else to say except thank you. That's enough, Cade assured her. He reached for a piece of the bread she had set out, and Willa noticed how careful he was with his movements, as though he was trying not to take up too much space or seem threatening. For such a large, powerful man, he had a remarkable gentleness about him. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, and Willa found herself stealing glances at him, curious about this mountain man who had appeared out of nowhere to save her life. He caught her looking once and gave her a small smile that transformed his face, making him look younger and less weathered. "Tell me about yourself," Cade said after a while. "How did you end up out here all alone?" Willa wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, drawing comfort from its warmth. "My father brought us here 5 years ago after my mother died of consumption back in Ohio. He wanted a fresh start, someplace where the air was clean and pure. We built this cabin together, cleared the land, started raising a few cattle and chickens." She paused, swallowing hard. "He died 3 months ago from a fever. I've been trying to keep things going by myself ever since." "I'm sorry," Cade said, and the sympathy in his voice was genuine. "That must have been incredibly hard." "It has been," Willa admitted, "but I did not want to give up on everything we built. This place, it is my home. It is all I have left of him." Cade nodded in understanding. "That makes sense. Your father chose well. This is good land, protected by the mountains, with water nearby. It is a place worth fighting for." "What about you?" Willa asked, eager to shift the focus away from her own grief. "How did you end up becoming a mountain man?" Cade's expression grew distant. "Long story. I grew up in Missouri on a farm, had a family, a younger sister and brother. When the war came, I joined up, fought for the Union. When I came back, everything had fallen apart. My parents were dead, my brother had moved east, and my sister had married and moved away. The farm was gone, sold for debts. I did not have anything tying me down anymore, so I headed west, kept going until I found the mountains. I've been there ever since." There was so much pain hidden in those simple words, Willa realized. This was a man who had lost everything, who had retreated into the wilderness to escape his demons. She understood that feeling all too well. "Do you ever get lonely?" she asked softly. Cade's eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw the raw truth there before he looked away. "Yes, but loneliness is better than the alternative sometimes. Out there in the mountains, I do not have to worry about losing anyone, about letting anyone down. It is just me and the wilderness." "That sounds like a hard way to live," Willa observed. "It is," Cade agreed, "but it is the life I chose." He stood up, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. "I should start reinforcing your defenses, making this place more secure in case those men do come back." Over the next several hours, Willa watched in amazement as Cade transformed her vulnerable homestead into something resembling a fortress. He used logs and whatever materials he could find to build barriers around the windows, leaving small gaps that could be used as firing positions. He checked the integrity of the cabin walls and roof, making repairs where needed. He even dug out a shallow trench around part of the property that would make it harder for anyone to approach unseen. Willa helped where she could, hauling water and supplies, holding boards in place while he hammered. She was strong from years of farm work, but watching Cade work was like watching raw power in motion. His muscles flexed and bunched beneath his shirt as he lifted logs that she would have struggled to even drag. Sweat dampened his hair and made his shirt cling to his broad back, and Willa found herself having to look away more than once, her face flushing with thoughts that were decidedly improper. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Cade finally declared himself satisfied with their preparations. "It is not perfect," he said, surveying his work with a critical eye, "but it will give us a fighting chance if they come back." "It is amazing," Willa said honestly. "I never would have been able to do all this on my own. Thank you." Cade glanced at her, and something warm flickered in his gray eyes. "You are welcome." They stood there for a moment, watching the sunset together, and Willa felt a sense of peace she had not experienced in months. Despite the danger, despite the uncertainty of what tomorrow might bring, she felt safe with this man beside her. "I should prepare supper," she said finally, reluctantly breaking the comfortable silence. "Let me help," Cade offered. "I'm a decent cook, spend enough time making meals over a campfire." Working together in the small cabin kitchen, they prepared a simple meal of beans and salt pork with the last of Willa's bread. It was not fancy, but it was warm and filling, and Willa could not remember the last time she had enjoyed a meal more. Maybe it was because she was not eating alone, because she had someone to talk to share the space with. They talked about small things as they ate, nothing too deep or personal, just the comfortable exchange of two people getting to know each other. Cade told her about the mountains, about the wildlife he encountered, and the breathtaking vistas he had seen. Willa told him about her attempts at gardening, about the small victories and frequent frustrations of trying to make a life in the wilderness. As darkness fell completely, they moved their chairs closer to the fire, and the conversation continued. Willa found herself laughing at Cade's stories, surprised by his dry sense of humor. He had a way of describing things that made even ordinary events seem entertaining. "I should let you sleep," Cade said finally, noticing her stifling a yawn. "It has been a long day." "Where will you sleep?" Willa asked, suddenly realizing she had not thought about the practicalities of having a man staying on her property. "I will bed down in the barn," Cade said, standing and stretching. "I have slept in worse places, believe me." "That does not seem right," Willa protested. "You have done so much to help me. At least take my father's old bedroll. It is not much, but it is better than sleeping on bare ground." Cade looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression must have convinced him. "All right. Thank you." Willa retrieved the bedroll from where it had been stored in the corner and handed it to him. Their fingers brushed as he took it from her, and she felt that same jolt of awareness she had experienced earlier. "Good night, Willa," Cade said softly, his voice a low rumble in the darkness. "Good night, Cade," she replied. She watched from the window as he made his way to the barn, his large form disappearing into the shadows. Then she barred the door, checked her rifle one more time, and prepared for bed, knowing that tomorrow might bring new dangers, but feeling more hopeful than she had in months. Willa woke to the smell of coffee and smoke, and for a moment she was disoriented, not remembering why those scents seemed so unusual. Then the events of yesterday came flooding back, and she sat up quickly, her heart racing. She dressed hurriedly and opened the cabin door to find Cade already up and moving around, tending to a small fire he had built near the barn. He looked up as she emerged, and she saw that same gentle smile from yesterday. "Morning," he called out. "Hope you do not mind. I made coffee, and I shot a couple of rabbits earlier. Thought we could have a proper breakfast." "You have already been hunting?" Willa asked, amazed. The sun was barely above the horizon. "Could not sleep much," Cade admitted with a shrug. "Figured I might as well make myself useful." They ate breakfast together as the morning light strengthened, and Willa marveled at how quickly she had grown comfortable with this stranger's presence. He did not feel like a stranger anymore somehow. He felt like someone she had known for much longer. "What is the plan for today?" Willa asked as they cleaned up after the meal. "I want to scout around, see if I can find any sign of those outlaws," Cade replied. "And I think we should consider your long-term safety. Even if we run them off again, there might be others. You cannot defend this place alone indefinitely." "What are you suggesting?" Willa asked carefully. "Maybe you should consider selling, moving closer to a town where there are other people around, where you would be safer." Willa felt her spine stiffen. "I told you yesterday this is my home. I'm not abandoning it." "I am not saying abandon it," Cade said, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "I am just saying maybe it is not safe for you to be out here alone." "Then I will not be alone," Willa shot back. "I will hire someone to help, or I will learn to be better at defending myself. But I am not leaving." Cade studied her face, and she saw respect dawn in his eyes. "You are stubborn." "I prefer to think of it as determined," Willa replied, crossing her arms. "Fair enough," Cade said, and that ghost of a smile appeared again. "Then we will make this work. But you need to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me that if things get too dangerous, if those men come back with more numbers or better weapons, you will consider getting to safety. Your father would not want you to die defending this place." Willa wanted to argue, but she could see the genuine concern in Cade's expression, and she knew he was right. "All right, I promise, but only as a last resort." "That's all I ask," Cade said. He left shortly after to scout the area, and Willa threw herself into her daily chores, trying to keep her mind occupied. She fed the chickens, milked the cow, and started working on repairing a section of fence that had come loose. The physical labor felt good, helped burn off some of the nervous energy that had been building inside her. Cade returned around midday, his expression grim. "What is it?" Willa asked, her stomach tightening with anxiety. Found their camp about 5 miles north of here. They are still there, and from what I could see, they are planning something. They had a map spread out. We're pointing at different areas. A map of what? Could not get close enough to see for sure, but I would bet it is a map of this valley. They are planning their next move. Willa felt cold despite the warm sun. How long do you think we have? Hard to say. Could be tonight, could be a few days, but they are definitely planning to come back. Then we need to be ready, Willa said, trying to sound braver than she felt. We will be, Cade assured her. I have dealt with men like this before. They are bullies, used to intimidating people. But when they face real resistance, they often fold. I hope you are right, Willa said. Over the next 2 days, an odd sort of routine developed. Cade would scout the area each morning and evening, checking on the Outlaws' camp and making sure there were no nasty surprises heading their way. The rest of the time, he helped Willa with the endless tasks required to keep the homestead running. He repaired the barn roof, fixed several sections of fencing, and even helped her harvest the last of her small vegetable garden before the coming winter could destroy it. Working alongside him, Willa found herself increasingly drawn to this quiet, strong man who had entered her life so unexpectedly. She loved watching him work, the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt, the way he approached every task with focused determination. But it was more than just his physical presence that attracted her. It was his kindness, his dry humor, the way he listened when she talked, really listened as though her words mattered. She caught him watching her sometimes too, his gray eyes following her movements with an intensity that made her skin feel warm. Neither of them acted on the growing attraction between them, both seemingly aware that the situation was complicated enough without adding that element. On the third evening after the initial confrontation, as they sat by the fire after supper, Cade finally voiced what they had both been thinking. They're going to make their move soon, he said quietly. I can feel it. They have been at that camp for 3 days now, and men like that do not have much patience. Tonight? Willa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe, or tomorrow, but soon. Willa nodded, trying to control the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. What do? We prepare. We make sure all our weapons are loaded and ready. We position ourselves where we can defend the cabin most effectively, and we do not take any chances. He turned to look at her, his expression serious. Willa, when this starts, if I tell you to do something, you need to do it immediately without question. Can you do that? Yes, Willa said, meeting his eyes. I trust you, Cade. Something shifted in his expression at those words, something deep and profound. I will protect you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. No matter what it takes, I will keep you safe. I know, Willa said softly, and she meant it. Despite knowing this man for only 3 days, she believed him completely. They stayed up late into the night, keeping watch in shifts. Willa took the first watch while Cade got a few hours of sleep, and then they switched. It was during Cade's watch, in the darkest hours before dawn, that he heard them coming. Willa, he said urgently, touching her shoulder to wake her. They are here. She came awake instantly, reaching for her rifle. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady as she took up her position at the window Cade had indicated earlier. In the faint moonlight, she could see them, dark shapes moving through the trees, trying to approach the cabin from multiple directions. There were definitely 5 of them, just as before, but they were being more cautious this time, using the cover of darkness and the terrain to mask their approach. Wait until they get closer, Cade whispered from his position at the other window. We need to make our shots count. Willa nodded, even though she was not sure he could see her in the darkness. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, and she focused on controlling her breathing, just as her father had taught her. The outlaws were about 30 yards away when one of them stepped on a piece of wood that Cade had deliberately placed in the path, and the crack of breaking wood split the night air. Instantly, the element of surprise was lost. Rush them, she heard someone yell, and suddenly all 5 men were running toward the cabin, firing as they came. Bullets slammed into the walls and the shutters Cade had reinforced, splintering wood but not penetrating. Cade fired, and one of the attackers went down with a cry. Willa aimed at another figure and squeezed the trigger, feeling the rifle kick against her shoulder. She could not tell if she hit him, but the man stumbled and fell back. Good shot, Cade said, already reloading. Keep firing. The next few minutes were chaos. The outlaws had taken cover behind trees and rocks, firing at the cabin in a steady barrage. Cade moved from window to window with incredible speed despite his size, firing, reloading, firing again. His face was set in grim determination, and Willa understood in that moment that this was a man who had seen combat before, who knew how to stay calm in a fight. Another outlaw fell to Cade's rifle, and she heard cursing and shouting from outside. "Fall back!" someone yelled, and the firing slowed and then stopped as the surviving attackers retreated into the darkness. "Did we win?" Willa asked, her ears ringing from the gunfire. "For now," Cade replied, his eyes never leaving the windows. "But that was just their first attempt. They will regroup and try again." He was right. As dawn broke, they could see the outlaws had taken up positions about 70 yards away, behind a cluster of rocks that provided excellent cover. 2 of the 5 were clearly dead or too injured to continue fighting, which left 3 still active. "We hurt them," Cade observed, "but they are not giving up." The stalemate continued through the morning. Occasional shots were fired from both sides, but mostly it was a waiting game, each side trying to figure out the other's next move. Around midday, the bearded leader, Jack Mallory, called out from his position. "Nathanson, I know that is you in there. This is between you and me. No need for the woman to get hurt. Send her out and we will let her go." "Like hell," Willa muttered, but Cade had already dismissed the offer with a shake of his head. "Your word does not mean anything, Mallory," Cade called back. "You are a murderer and a thief. Why would I trust you?" "Because you do not have a choice," Mallory shot back. "We can sit here all day, all week if we have to. Eventually you will run out of water or food or ammunition, but we can just ride into town and resupply whenever we need to. You are trapped." Cade did not respond, and Willa could see him thinking, working through the problem. Mallory was right in one sense. They could not stay in the cabin indefinitely. They had enough water for maybe a week if they rationed carefully, and food for longer than that, but ammunition was the real concern. They had already used a significant portion of their bullets in the night attack. "We need to break this stalemate," Cade said quietly, speaking only to Willa. "We need to take the fight to them." "How?" Willa asked. "There are 3 of them, and they have good cover. I'm going to sneak out the back, circle around, and come at them from the side. While I am moving, I need you to keep firing, keep their attention on the cabin." "Cade, that is too dangerous," Willa protested. "What if they see you?" "They will not," Cade said with confidence. "I have been sneaking through wilderness for years, hunting game that has much better senses than these men. I can do this." "But what if something goes wrong? What if they hurt you?" Cade turned to look at her fully, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. "I will come back," he said simply. "I promise you, Willa. I will come back." Before she could respond, before she could tell him that she cared what happened to him, that the thought of him getting hurt made her feel like her chest was caving in, he had moved to the back of the cabin where a small window faced away from the outlaw's position. "Wait 10 minutes after I leave, then start firing," he instructed. "Do not expose yourself too much. Just shoot enough to make them think we are both still in here." "Cade," Willa said, her voice breaking. He paused, looking back at her. "Be careful," she whispered. His expression softened. "Always am." Then he was gone, slipping out the window with surprising grace for such a large man. Willa watched him disappear into the trees behind the cabin, her heart in her throat. She counted the minutes slowly, each one feeling like an hour, and then she began firing, spacing her shots out to make it seem like there were 2 people shooting. From their position, the outlaws could not see that Cade had left, and they returned fire, apparently convinced that both defenders were still in the cabin. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Willa was starting to panic, wondering if something had gone wrong, when she heard gunfire from a different direction. The outlaws' position was suddenly under attack from the side, and she heard shouting and confusion. She kept firing, adding to the chaos, and within minutes it was over. 1 more outlaw was down, and the remaining 2 were running, abandoning their position and their wounded companion. Cade emerged from the trees, his rifle still raised, watching the fleeing men until they were out of sight. Then he turned and started walking back toward the cabin, and Willa threw open the door and ran to meet him. "Are you hurt?" she asked frantically, her hands reaching up to touch his face, his shoulders, checking for injuries. "I am fine," Cade assured her, catching her hands in his. "Not a scratch on me." "You promised you would come back," Willa said, and suddenly she was crying. all the fear and tension and emotion of the past few days overwhelming her. "Hey, hey," Cade said softly, pulling her against his chest, his strong arms wrapping around her. "I am here. I am safe. We are both safe." Willa buried her face against his shirt, breathing in the scent of him, leather and smoke and something uniquely Cade. She felt his hand stroking her hair, his touch gentle and comforting. "I was so scared," she admitted. "I thought they might kill you, and I realized that I could not bear it if something happened to you." Cade pulled back slightly, his hands coming up to cup her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "Nothing happened to me. I'm right here." Their eyes met, and Willa saw her own feelings reflected back at her. Without thinking, without worrying about propriety or what was appropriate, she rose up on her toes and kissed him. For just a moment, Cade froze, surprised, and then he was kissing her back, his arms tightening around her, pulling her closer. The kiss was hungry and desperate, full of all the fear and longing they had both been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cade rested his forehead against hers. "Willa," he said, his voice rough, "I should not have done that. You deserve better than someone like me." "Do not tell me what I deserve," Willa said fiercely. "I know what I want, and that is you. These past few days with you, I have felt more alive, more myself, than I have in years. Do not tell me that is wrong." "I have nothing to offer you," Cade protested. "I live in the mountains like an animal. I do not have money or property or prospects." "I do not care about any of that," Willa insisted. "I care about you. You are brave and kind and good, and you make me feel safe and happy. That is worth more than all the money in the world." Cade looked at her for a long moment, and she could see the war happening behind his eyes, the part of him that wanted to believe her fighting against years of self-imposed isolation and loneliness. "I care about you too," he finally admitted. "More than I thought possible. These past few days, being here with you, it has reminded me of what I have been missing, living alone in those mountains. But Willa, I do not want to trap you in a hard life. You deserve someone who can give you comfort and security." "You already give me those things," Willa said, "just by being here, by being yourself. I have been alone on this homestead for 3 months, barely surviving. But with you here, everything feels possible again. Please, Cade, do not leave when this is over. Stay with me." She watched the emotions play across his face, watched the moment when his defenses finally crumbled. Then he was kissing her again, softer this time but no less intense, and she knew she had won. "I will stay," he murmured against her lips, "for as long as you will have me." "Forever then," Willa replied, and she felt his smile against her mouth. They stood there for a long time, holding each other, and Willa felt as though a weight she had been carrying for months had finally lifted. She was not alone anymore. She had someone to stand beside her, someone to face whatever challenges came their way. "We should check on that wounded outlaw," Cade said finally, reluctantly pulling away, "and make sure the other 2 really are gone." The wounded man turned out to be the scarred one who had been so aggressive during the first confrontation. He was badly injured, shot through the shoulder, and he glared at them with pure hatred as Cade approached. "You should have let us have what we wanted," he spat. "This is all your fault." "You made your choices," Cade replied calmly. "Now you have to live with the consequences, or die with them, depending on how this goes." Despite his harsh words, Cade bound the man's wound to stop the bleeding, and they secured him in the barn. Tomorrow, they would take him to the nearest town and turn him over to the law. The other 2 outlaws, including Mallory, had disappeared completely, their tracks heading east at a gallop. Cade thought it unlikely they would come back, not after losing 3 of their gang. "They will probably try to recruit more men and find easier targets," he said as they walked back to the cabin. "But just in case, I will keep an eye out for the next few weeks. Make sure they do not double back." That night, as they sat by the fire after a quiet supper, Willa felt a sense of peace and contentment she had never experienced before. Cade sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, and every so often his hand would find hers, their fingers intertwining. "Tell me about your dreams," Cade said softly. "What do you want for your future?" Willa thought about it for a moment. "I want to make this homestead thrive," she said. "I want to expand the herd, maybe plant more crops. I want to build something lasting, something I can be proud of." She paused, then added quietly, "And I want to share it with someone. I do not want to be alone anymore." "You will not be," Cade promised. "I am here now, and I am not going anywhere." "What about you?" Willa asked. "What do you want?" Cade was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. "I spent so many years just surviving, not really living," he finally said. "I told myself I was happy in the mountains, that I did not need anyone or anything else. But that was a lie. I was hiding, running away from the pain of everything I had lost. Being here with you, it has shown me that I was just existing, not truly alive." He turned to look at her, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight. "What I want is to build a real life again. I want to wake up every morning with purpose, with someone I care about beside me. I want to create something good out of all the bad things that have happened." "We can do that together," Willa said, squeezing his hand. "Yes," Cade agreed. "We can." The next morning, they loaded the wounded outlaw onto Cade's horse and made the long journey to the nearest town, which was a small settlement called Riverside, about 15 miles south. The local sheriff was grateful for the information about Jack Mallory and his gang, and he took custody of the prisoner with a promise to send a telegram to the authorities in Deadwood. "You folks did a good thing," the sheriff said, shaking Cade's hand. "Mallory has been a plague on this territory for months. Maybe now we can finally bring him to justice." On the ride back to the homestead, Willa and Cade talked about their plans for the future. Cade had savings from years of selling furs and pelts, and he wanted to use that money to help improve the homestead, maybe buy some cattle to expand the herd. "I also know how to build," he said. "We could expand the cabin, add another room or two, make it more comfortable for the winter." "I would like that," Willa said, her heart swelling with happiness. Over the following weeks, they fell into a routine that felt natural and right. Cade proved to be an incredibly hard worker, tackling projects that Willa had been putting off because she did not have the strength or knowledge to complete them alone. He repaired the barn, built a new chicken coop, and even started work on expanding the cabin, just as he had promised. Willa found herself falling more in love with him every day. She loved the way he sang softly to himself while he worked, loved the way his face lit up when he saw her, loved the gentle way he handled the animals and the fierce way he protected her from any threat. They had not spoken specifically about marriage, but it was an unspoken understanding between them. Cade had moved his belongings into the cabin, sleeping on the floor near the fire at first, but eventually Willa had insisted he take her father's old bed in the corner. She still slept in her own bed on the opposite side of the room, but it felt right having him there, knowing he was close. One evening in late October, as the first snow of the season began to fall, Cade set down the tools he had been using and walked over to where Willa was preparing supper. "Willa," he said, his voice serious, "there is something I need to say to you." She turned to face him, her heart suddenly pounding. "What is it?" "I have been thinking about the future, about us," Cade began, and she could see that he was nervous, which was unusual for this confident man. "I know we have not known each other very long, only about 6 weeks, but in that time, you have become the most important person in my life. I cannot imagine going back to the way things were before I met you." "I feel the same way," Willa said softly. "I do not have much to offer," Cade continued. "I am not rich, I am not refined, but I promise you, if you will have me, I will spend every day of my life working to make you happy, to build a good life for us. I will protect you and provide for you and love you with everything I have." Willa felt tears streaming down her face as she realized what he was saying. "Willa Crawford," Cade said, taking her hands in his. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," Willa breathed, throwing her arms around his neck. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Cade laughed, a sound of pure joy, and spun her around, holding her tight against him. When he set her down, he kissed her, long and deep and full of promise. "I do not have a ring," he said apologetically when they finally broke apart. "I do not need a ring," Willa assured him. "All I need is you." They were married 3 weeks later in Riverside, in a simple ceremony performed by the local preacher. Willa wore her best dress, which she had carefully mended and cleaned for the occasion. Cade had gotten a haircut and trimmed his beard, and he looked so handsome in his clean clothes that Willa could barely take her eyes off him. The sheriff and his wife stood as witnesses, and after the ceremony, they hosted a small celebration dinner for the newlyweds. It was not fancy, but it was perfect. and Willa had never been happier. The ride back to the homestead, their homestead now, felt like coming home in a way Willa had never experienced before. This was not just the place where she lived, it was where she belonged, where she and Cade would build their life together. That night, as man and wife, they came together for the first time, and Willa discovered a depth of passion and connection she had never imagined possible. Cade was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterward, lying in his arms in the expanded cabin that was now truly their home, Willa felt completely at peace. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you," Cade replied, his hand stroking her hair. "More than I ever thought possible." The winter that followed was hard, as winters in Wyoming always were, but it was also beautiful. Cade and Willa worked together to keep the homestead running, feeding the animals, keeping the cabin warm, preparing for the spring thaw. They talked for hours by the fire, sharing stories and dreams, learning everything about each other. Cade taught Willa how to track animals in the snow, how to read the signs of changing weather, and how to survive in the wilderness. Willa taught Cade how to cook more elaborate meals, how to preserve food for the long winter, and how to find joy in small domestic comforts. They made love often, discovering each other's bodies and desires, growing closer with each passing day. By February, Willa began to suspect she was carrying Cade's child, and her suspicions were confirmed when her courses did not come. She told Cade one evening as they sat by the fire, his arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "I have news," she said softly. "What kind of news?" Cade asked, and she could hear the curiosity in his voice. "The best kind," Willa replied, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Cade was completely still, and then he was turning her around, his face alight with joy and wonder. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "As certain as I can be," Willa said, laughing at his expression. "You are going to be a father, Cade." He kissed her then, so tenderly it made her want to cry, and she felt his hand remain on her stomach, protective and reverent. "I am going to be a father," he repeated, as though he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a family." "Yes," Willa confirmed, "a real family." The months that followed were filled with preparation. Cade built a cradle from smooth pine wood, working on it every evening with painstaking care. Willa sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart full of love for the child she had not even met yet. Spring arrived, bringing new life to the homestead. The cattle they had purchased the previous fall had survived the winter, and several of the cows were pregnant, promising to expand their herd. Cade plowed fields and planted crops, and Willa tended her garden, watching her belly grow as the plants grew. In early October, almost exactly a year after Cade had proposed, their son was born. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Cade feared he might lose Willa, but she was strong, stronger than he had given her credit for, and when the sun rose on a new day, their son's cries filled the cabin. "He is perfect," Cade said, his voice breaking as he held his son for the first time, this tiny, perfect creature that he and Willa had created together. "Thank you. Thank you for this gift." Willa, exhausted but radiant, smiled at him from the bed. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months, never quite settling on the perfect one. But now, looking at his son's face, Cade knew. "Samuel," he said, "after my father, Samuel Nathanson." "Samuel," Willa repeated, testing the name. "It is perfect. Hello, Samuel. Welcome to the world." The years that followed were not always easy. Homesteading never was. There were harsh winters and dry summers, years when the crops failed and they had to tighten their belts. But there were also moments of incredible joy and beauty. Samuel grew into a strong, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, learning how to work the land and care for the animals. 2 years after Samuel was born, Willa gave birth to a daughter they named Eleanor, who had her mother's auburn hair and her father's gray eyes. 3 years after that came another son, Thomas, who was quieter than his siblings, but no less loved. Cade expanded the cabin twice more to accommodate their growing family, and the homestead prospered under their combined efforts. They acquired more land, more cattle, and became known in the region as hard-working and honest people. The outlaws who had threatened Willa all those years ago never returned. Jack Mallory was eventually caught and hanged for his crimes in Montana, and the other surviving member of his gang disappeared into history. Sometimes, on quiet evenings after the children were in bed, Cade and Willa would sit on the porch they had built, watching the sunset over the mountains, and reflect on how far they had come. "Do you ever regret it?" Willa asked one such evening, her hand in his. "Giving up your life in the mountains to settle down here?" Cade looked at her, this woman who had given him everything, who had pulled him out of his self-imposed exile and showed him what it meant to truly live. "Never," he said firmly. "You and the children, this life we have built together, it is everything I never knew I wanted. You saved me, Willa, just as much as I saved you that day." "We saved each other," Willa corrected, leaning against his shoulder. "Yes," Cade agreed, kissing the top of her head. "We did." As the years passed, their love only deepened. They weathered storms both literal and figurative, supporting each other through the challenges that life inevitably brought. When Cade's back started to ache from years of hard labor, Willa was there to massage the sore muscles and remind him he was not as young as he used to be. When Willa worried about their children as they grew and began to forge their own paths, Cade was there to reassure her that they had raised them well, that they would be fine. Samuel eventually married a young woman from Riverside and took over most of the day-to-day operations of the homestead, allowing Cade and Willa to slow down a bit to enjoy the fruits of their labor. Eleanor became a teacher in town, bringing education to the children of the region. Thomas, the quietest of their children, surprised everyone by becoming a veterinarian, traveling throughout Wyoming to tend to sick and injured animals. Grandchildren followed, filling the homestead with laughter and joy. Cade taught them the same skills his father had taught him, and later that he had taught his own children. Willa told them stories of the old days, of how their grandfather had appeared out of nowhere to save her from outlaws, how their love had grown from those desperate, dangerous beginnings. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Cade finally gave Willa the ring he had promised all those years ago. It was not fancy, just a simple gold band with a small stone, but Willa cried when he slipped it on her finger. "I have been saving for years," Cade admitted. "I wanted to get you something worthy of you." "You have always been worthy of me," Willa replied, kissing him. "And I have always been worthy of you. We were meant to find each other, Cade. I truly believe that." "So do I," Cade agreed. They lived to see their children's children grow, to see the homestead become a thriving ranch that employed several families. They lived to see Wyoming become a state in 1890, to see the Wild West slowly transform into something more civilized, though the mountains remained as wild and beautiful as ever. On a warm summer evening in 1903, Cade and Willa sat together on their porch, holding hands as they had done countless times before. They were in their 60s now, their hair gray, their bodies showing the wear of decades of hard work. But their love was as strong as it had been that first day when Cade had fired that warning shot and changed both their lives forever. "Do you remember the first thing you said to me?" Willa asked, her voice soft with memory. "I told you that you could lower the rifle, that I meant you no harm," Cade replied, smiling. "And I believed you," Willa said. "Even though I had no reason to trust a stranger, I believed you. My heart knew before my mind did that you were someone special." "I knew it too," Cade admitted. "The moment I saw you standing there on that porch, brave and determined and beautiful, I knew my life was about to change. I just did not realize how much or how grateful I would be for it." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, the same colors that had graced the sky on so many evenings throughout their lives together. "I love you, Willa Nathanson," Cade said, using the name she had carried for over a quarter of a century. "I love you, Cade Nathanson," Willa replied. "Today, tomorrow, and forever." Around them, their legacy lived on in the homestead they had built, in the children and grandchildren they had raised, in the love they had shared so freely and deeply. The mountains stood eternal watch over it all, silent witnesses to a love story that had begun with violence and fear but had blossomed into something beautiful and lasting. Years continued to pass, and Cade and Willa grew older together, facing the inevitable challenges that came with age. Cade's strength, which had once seemed infinite, began to fade. His hands, which had held guns and tools and built an entire life, started to shake slightly. But they still reached for Willa every morning when he woke, still held her close every night before they slept. Willa's eyes, which had once been so sharp, began to dim. She needed spectacles to read, and her sewing became more challenging. But she still saw Cade with the same clarity she always had, still saw the good, strong, protective man who had walked into her life when she needed him most. In the spring of 1908, Cade fell ill with pneumonia. The doctor from town came and did what he could, but they all knew that at Cade's age, the illness was serious. Willa refused to leave his side, sitting by his bed day and night, holding his hand, talking to him, reminding him of all the beautiful moments they had shared. "Do you remember the first time you told me you loved me?" Willa asked one evening as she sat beside him, wiping his fevered brow with a cool cloth. Cade's eyes opened, still that same gray she had fallen in love with all those years ago, though clouded now with illness. "I remember," he said, his voice weak but clear. "It was the night after we were married. You said it first, and I thought my heart might burst with happiness." "Mine did burst," Willa said, tears streaming down her face. "You filled up all the empty places inside me, Cade. You made me whole." "You did the same for me," Cade replied, his hand squeezing hers weakly. "I was just existing before you. You taught me how to live, how to love, how to be part of something bigger than myself." Their children gathered around them, Samuel and Eleanor and Thomas, all of them crying as they watched their father struggle. The grandchildren were there too, the ones old enough to understand, filling the small room that had been Cade and Willa's sanctuary for so many years. "Promise me something," Cade said, his eyes finding Willa's. "Anything," Willa whispered. "Promise me you will not mourn for too long. Promise me you will keep living, keep finding joy. You have so much life left in you, Willa. Do not waste it on grief." "I cannot promise that," Willa said, her voice breaking. "How can I find joy without you?" "Because that is what love does," Cade said. "It does not end when one person leaves. It lives on in everything we built, in every person we touched. Our love is in these walls, in the land, in our children and their children. That will never die." But Willa could not accept a world without Cade. She had spent over 30 years with this man, had built a life so intertwined with his that she did not know where she ended, and he began. "I am not ready to let you go," she sobbed. "I know," Cade said gently, "but it is not up to us, is it? All we can do is be grateful for the time we had. And Willa, I'm so grateful. You gave me everything I never dared to hope for." That night, surrounded by his family, in the home he had helped build and expand over the decades, Cade Nathanson passed peacefully away. His last sight was of Willa's face, his last sensation was her hand holding his, and his last thought was of how blessed he had been to love and be loved by such an extraordinary woman. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Wyoming. Cade and Willa had become pillars of their community, known for their kindness and integrity. The stories people told about Cade painted a picture of a man who was strong but gentle, fierce but fair, someone who had made a real difference in the lives of those around him. Willa thought she might die from the grief. The pain of losing Cade was physical, like someone had reached into her chest and torn out a vital piece of her. She moved through the days following his death in a daze, going through the motions of living without really being present. But slowly, with the help of her children and grandchildren, she began to heal. Not to forget, never to forget, but to find a way to carry the grief alongside the beautiful memories. She started taking walks again, the same walks she and Cade used to take around the property. She visited his grave every day, talking to him, telling him about what was happening with the family, with the ranch, with the world. Sometimes she swore she could feel his presence, could feel him walking beside her. One afternoon, about 6 months after Cade's death, Willa was sitting on the porch when her youngest grandson, a boy of 5 named Caleb, climbed into her lap. "Grandma, why are you crying?" he asked, wiping at her tears with his small hands. "Because I miss your grandfather very much," Willa replied honestly. "But he is still here," Caleb said with the simple certainty of a child. "He's in the mountains, in the trees, and the wind. Daddy said so." Willa looked at this child, this continuation of the love she and Cade had shared, and felt something shift inside her. Cade was still here in a way. He lived on in their children, in the homestead they had built, in the love they had shared so deeply that it had become part of the very land itself. You are right, Willa said, hugging Caleb close. He is still here. He will always be here. From that day forward, Willa made a conscious choice to honor Cade's memory by living fully, by finding joy in the life they had built together. She spent time with her grandchildren, teaching them the same lessons Cade had taught their parents. She maintained the homestead with the help of her sons, keeping it running as well as Cade would have wanted. She even started writing down their story, preserving the tale of how a lonely mountain man and an isolated homesteader had found each other and built something beautiful. On what would have been their 35th wedding anniversary, Willa made a special trip to Cade's grave, bringing wildflowers she had picked from the meadow where they used to walk together. 35 years, she said softly, placing the flowers on the headstone. 35 years of love and partnership and adventure. Thank you, Cade. Thank you for finding me, for saving me, for loving me. You gave me the most beautiful life I could have imagined. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees, and Willa smiled through her tears. She could almost hear Cade's voice in that wind, telling her that he loved her, that he was proud of her, that he would be waiting for her when it was her time. Willa lived for another 12 years, remaining sharp and active well into her 70s. She saw more grandchildren born, and even a few great-grandchildren. She saw the ranch continue to prosper, saw her children's children take on roles in managing the property. She saw the world change around her, saw automobiles replace horses, saw electricity come to even remote areas like theirs. But through it all, she carried Cade with her. His memory was a constant companion, a source of strength when things got difficult, a reminder of what true love looked like. In the summer of 1920, at the age of 76, Willa passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was buried beside Cade, and on her headstone, beneath her name and dates, were engraved the words, "Beloved wife, mother, grandmother." She lived fully and loved deeply. The homestead continued on, passed down through generations of Nathansons, each one carrying forward the legacy that Cade and Willa had begun all those years ago. The cabin was eventually replaced with a larger house, but the original structure was preserved, turned into a kind of museum where family members could come and connect with their roots. The story of how it all began, of the outlaws who tried to raid an isolated homestead and the mountain man who defended it with relentless fury, became family legend. It was told and retold around dinner tables and campfires, each generation adding their own details, but keeping the heart of the story intact. Because at its core, it was not really a story about violence or danger. It was a story about love, about two people who found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something that lasted not just their lifetimes, but far beyond. It was a story about courage and determination, about choosing to fight for what mattered, about the power of partnership and commitment. The mountains that had watched over Cade and Willa's homestead continued to stand eternal, silent witnesses to the love story that had unfolded in their shadow. And if you listened carefully, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, you could almost hear echoes of their voices, Cade's deep and rumbling, Willa's soft and warm, still talking to each other, still sharing the bond that not even death could break. Their great-great-grandchildren still work the land today, still tend to cattle and crops, still live in that beautiful valley between the mountains. And every single one of them knows the story of their ancestors, of how their family began with a gunshot that brought two souls together, of how love can bloom even in the hardest circumstances, of how one moment of courage can change everything. The legacy of Cade and Willa Nathanson lives on, not just in the land they claimed and the family they raised, but in the example they set. They showed that love is not just a feeling, but a choice, made every day, in big moments and small ones. They showed that home is not a place but a person, that family is what you build with your own hands and heart. They showed that it is never too late to start over, to open yourself to connection, to take a chance on love, even when everything in your life has taught you to be cautious. And perhaps, most importantly, they showed that the greatest adventures are not the ones we plan, but the ones that find us when we are brave enough to say yes to the unexpected, to defend what matters, to stand together against whatever challenges come our way. In the end, theirs was a simple story made profound by the depth of feeling and commitment they brought to it. A mountain man and a homesteader, brought together by violence, but bound together by love, building a life that outlasted them both and continues to inspire generations yet to come. That is the true meaning of happily ever after, not an ending but a beginning, a foundation upon which countless other stories can be built, each one carrying forward the love and courage of those who came before. Cade and Willa's story became part of the land itself, woven into the mountains and valleys of Wyoming, a testament to what two people can accomplish when they choose to face the world together. And so, their love continues, endless and enduring, a beacon for anyone who has ever felt alone, who has ever wondered if they will find their person, who has ever doubted that love can survive the hardest tests. Cade and Willa proved that it can, that it does, that it will, if we are brave enough to fight for it with the same relentless fury that Cade brought to defending Willa's homestead on that fateful September morning in 1876. Their story reminds us that sometimes the greatest loves come from the most unexpected places, that heroes do not always wear badges or come riding in on white horses, that sometimes they emerge from the trees at exactly the right moment, that sometimes they look like mountain men with long hair and weathered faces and hearts big enough to hold all the love in the world. And their story tells us that when you find that person, that one person who makes everything make sense, you hold on tight. You build something beautiful together, and you never, ever let go, not even when death itself tries to separate you. Because love like that, true love, the kind that Cade and Willa shared, it transcends everything. It becomes immortal, living on in every person it touches, in every life it changes, in every heart it inspires to be brave enough to love fully and completely. That is the legacy of Cade and Willa Nathanson. That is the story of the mountain man who defended an isolated homestead with relentless fury, and found in the process something worth defending for the rest of his life. That is the story of the woman who stood her ground against impossible odds and discovered that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from standing alone, but from allowing someone else to stand beside you. Their story is a reminder that in this vast, often harsh world, connection is what saves us, love is what sustains us, and the choice to open our hearts despite the risks is what makes us truly human. It is a story for the ages, simple in its telling but infinite in its meaning, a tale of the Wild West that is really a tale of the human heart and its incredible capacity to heal, to hope, and to love. And as long as there are people to tell it, as long as there are hearts to be moved by it, the story of Cade and Willa will continue. A light in the darkness, a promise that love can find us even in our most isolated moments, that we are never truly alone as long as we have the courage to reach out and take the hand that is offered. That September morning in 1876 changed two lives forever, but its impact rippled outward, touching countless others across generations. It became a story of hope, of perseverance, of the incredible things that can happen when two people decide that what they have together is worth fighting for with everything they have. In the end, that is what we all want, is it not? To find that person who will defend us with relentless fury, who will stand beside us no matter what challenges arise, who will build a life with us that outlasts our time on this earth. Cade and Willa found that in each other, and in doing so, they created something truly immortal. Their love story, born in danger and nurtured through hard work and unwavering commitment, became a foundation upon which an entire family dynasty was built. Every Nathanson who came after them carried a piece of their love, their strength, their determination to make a life worth living even when circumstances were difficult. And somewhere in the Wyoming mountains, if you know where to look, you can still find the original cabin where it all began, preserved and protected by generations who understood its significance. You can stand on that porch where Willa first stood with her rifle, where she first saw Cade emerge from the trees, where they first kissed after the battle was over. You can walk the land they worked together, see the mountains that provided the backdrop for their love story, feel the wind that still whispers their names. And if you close your eyes and listen carefully, you can almost hear them, still talking to each other across the years, still sharing the bond that defined both their lives. That is the power of a love like theirs. It does not die. It does not fade. It becomes part of the landscape, part of the history, part of the very fabric of the world. It inspires those who come after to be braver, to love more deeply, to fight for what matters with that same relentless fury that Cade brought to defending Willa on that September morning so long ago. Their story proves that the greatest adventures are not found in distant lands or exotic locations. They are found in the everyday choice to love someone fully, to commit to building a life together, to face whatever comes with courage and partnership. They are found in the small moments as much as the big ones, in morning coffee shared on a porch, in hands held while watching the sunset, in the quiet certainty of waking up next to the person who makes everything worthwhile. Cade and Willa's legacy is not just the ranch they built or the family they raised. It is the example they set of what love can be when we are brave enough to embrace it fully, when we are willing to defend it against any threat, when we understand that finding your person is worth any sacrifice, any hardship, any challenge. Their story continues to resonate because it speaks to something fundamental in the human experience, that deep longing for connection, for partnership, for someone who will see us at our most vulnerable and choose to stay anyway, to fight for us, to build something beautiful with us out of even the most difficult circumstances. And so, more than a century after that fateful day when outlaws tried to raid an isolated homestead and a mountain man defended it with relentless fury, their love story endures, a testament to the power of human connection, the strength of commitment, and the incredible things that can happen when two people decide that what they have together is worth protecting, worth nurturing, worth building a life around. That is the true happily ever after. Not a fairy tale ending, but a real, lived experience of love that transforms everything it touches, that creates ripples extending far beyond the original two people, that becomes something larger than life, precisely because it is rooted in the most authentic, most human desire of all, to love and be loved in return, fully, deeply, and forever.